We are looking at one of the grisliest headlines in the ancient world today.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone knows the punchline, right? The head of John the Baptist on a platter. But if you look past the shock value of the violence, you find a psychological case study in weak leadership that is just terrifyingly relevant to 2026.
It is. It's a story that feels like it belongs in a darker season of Succession or maybe a Shakespearean tragedy.
Exactly.
But we are diving into the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 14 through 29. And honestly, the actual beheading it's almost the least interesting part of the text.
I completely agree. The violence is the outcome, but the mechanism, the why of it all, that's what we really need to unpack. We are recording this for release on Friday, February 6, 2026, and that date actually matters for the analysis because of who else is commemorated today. But let's start with the main character, and it is not John the Baptist.
No, not at all. The protagonist, or really the anti-hero of this whole passage, is King Herod Antipas. And to understand it, you really have to understand the specific political pressure cooker he was living in.
Right, because he's called King Herod here, but technically, historically, he wasn't a king, was he? He was a tetrarch.
That is a critical distinction. He was a client ruler under the Roman Empire. So he ruled Galilee and Perea, but he served at the pleasure of the emperor. His power was completely conditional. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, looking at Rome to make sure he was pleasing them, and then looking at his own people to make sure they weren't about to revolt.
So he's basically a middle manager with a crown.
That's a great way to put it.
And that explains the paranoia that kicks off this whole section.
Yeah.
The text actually starts after John is dead. Mark uses this flashback technique.
Right.
Herod hears about Jesus performing miracles, and his mind just goes to a very dark place immediately.
It's the first thing he says. He hears these reports of a man healing the sick and casting out demons, and he doesn't say, oh, the Messiah is here, or maybe it's a new prophet.
No.
He says, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised.
Wow. That is a fascinating window into his psychology. It's pure guilt. He thinks he's being haunted.
It tells us that John never really left Herod's mind. You know, he killed the man, but he couldn't kill the conscience that John represented.
Yeah.
And that flashback structure Mark uses is just brilliant because it forces us to ask, how did we get here? How did a ruler who actually had this strange respect for John end up killing him?
That relationship, the dynamic between Herod and John, was the biggest surprise for me in the source material. I think the cultural caricature is that Herod just hated John and wanted him gone.
Right, that's what you'd assume.
But the text says the opposite. It says Herod feared John, knowing he was a righteous man, and he kept him safe.
Kept him safe. Presumably from his wife, Herodias, who we will definitely get to in a moment. But look at verse 20. This is the absolute key to Herod's character. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly.
He heard him gladly. I just want to linger on this because it seems like such a contradiction. John is sitting in a dungeon, likely telling Herod that his marriage is a sham and his soul is in danger, and Herod is enjoying the podcast.
It's the phenomena of the pet prophet. Think about it. Herod is a man of appetites, power, wealth, illicit relationships.
Yeah.
But he's not a psychopath. He has a moral sense.
Okay.
He recognizes that John has something he completely lacks: holiness, integrity, a connection to the divine.
So he visits the prison to get a kind of a contact high from John's righteousness.
In a way, yes. It stimulates him intellectually and emotionally. He listens gladly because it makes him feel like he's engaging with the truth.
Right.
But, and this is the crucial part, he doesn't do anything about it.
Right.
He is perplexed, meaning he sees the gap between John's words and his own life, but he just sits in the gap.
That feels incredibly modern. It's like the person who binges self-help books or listens to rigorous philosophical debates about ethics feels inspired by the idea of change, but changes absolutely nothing about their behavior.
Exactly. It's the passive consumption of truth. You feel like a better person just because you listen to the good advice, even if you totally ignore it. Herod wanted John as a curiosity, a conversation partner, maybe even a spiritual insurance policy. He wanted the voice of God within earshot, but he kept it behind bars so it couldn't actually disrupt his life.
He wanted the truth completely under his control, but there was someone else in the palace who had no interest in playing these intellectual games. Herodias.
Oh, Herodias. She is the steal in this story. If Herod is this vacillating, weak-willed leader, Herodias is the Machiavellian power player. She doesn't have mixed feelings about John.
No, the text says she had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death. And we need to be really clear about why. This wasn't just because John was loud or rude. It was a very specific legal and religious accusation.
Right. John was attacking the legitimacy of her actual marriage.
I looked up the reference for this. It's in Leviticus. The law of Moses explicitly forbids marrying your brother's wife while your brother is still alive.
That's right.
And Herod Antipas had divorced his first wife to marry Herodias, who was the wife of his half-brother Philip.
And this wasn't just a private domestic issue. In the ancient world, and specifically in Judea, the king's legitimacy was tied to his adherence to the law.
Okay, so if John the Baptist, who the people viewed as a prophet, is publicly declaring that the royal marriage is incestuous and unlawful,
That is political dynamite.
it completely undermines their authority. Herodias isn't just offended, she's threatened. If the marriage is illegitimate, her status as queen is illegitimate, her children's succession is illegitimate.
Precisely. For Herodias, John isn't some holy man to be listened to. He is an existential threat to her power. She wants him dead to silence the claim that she's living in sin.
But she's stuck.
She's stuck. She can't strike because Herod is playing this game of keeping him safe.
So she waits. And the text says an opportunity came. This brings us to the famous birthday banquet. And I think we need to set the scene accurately here. This isn't just a family birthday party with cake and balloons.
Far from it. Mark gives us the guest list. His nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee.
This goes right back to what we said about him being a client ruler. These are the people Herod relies on to keep his power. The military commanders, probably Roman officers or leaders of the local garrisons.
Yes.
The leading men, the aristocracy, the wealthy landowners.
This is a high-stakes networking event. Herod is on display. He needs to project strength, stability, generosity. He needs these men to respect him. If he looks weak in front of this specific group,
His grip on power is gone.
his grip on Galilee loosens. Absolutely.
Which makes what happens next so calculated.
Yeah.
Herodias' daughter comes in and dances. We don't need to get into the specific nature of the dance, but the result is clear. She pleased Herod and his guests.
And Herod, probably fueled by wine and the desperate need to impress these leading men, makes a classic mistake of a weak leader.
He grandstands.
He grandstands. He writes a blank check.
Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. And then he swears an oath on top of it. Up to half my kingdom.
It's just theatrical generosity. Look at me. Look how powerful and magnanimous I am. He's performing for the generals. He wants to be the big man.
Right.
But notice, he has just handed all his agency over to a child or a young woman because he's intoxicated by his own image.
And the girl doesn't know what to do with that power. She exits the room. She goes to her mother. For what should I ask?
This moment, it reveals that the girl likely wasn't in on the plot from the start.
Yeah.
But Herodias, she doesn't hesitate for a microsecond.
No.
She doesn't ask for half the kingdom. She doesn't ask for money or a villa in Rome or political alliances.
She says the head of John the Baptist.
It is just chilling focus. She is willing to burn half the kingdom worth of potential gain just to secure this one revenge. She knows this is her one chance to bypass Herod's protection of John.
And the daughter, maybe she's caught up in the bloodlust, or maybe she's just terrified of her mother. She adds the gruesome details herself. She goes back and demands it at once and on a platter.
The platter detail is grotesque, but it's also functional. It turns the execution into a course at the banquet.
Oh, wow.
It forces the issue into the public eye immediately. It prevents Herod from saying, okay, we'll do it tomorrow, and then changing his mind when he sobers up. She wants the proof right there on the table next to the wine.
And now we reach the climax of this psychological drama. Verse 26, the king was exceedingly sorry.
That sorrow is real. It's the conflict between his conscience, that part of him that heard John gladly, and his ego. He knows killing John is wrong. He knows it's a sin. He knows he is murdering a holy man.
But he does it anyway. And Mark tells us exactly why. It wasn't because he changed his mind about John. It was because of his oaths and his guests.
Let's just break that down. His oaths he had sworn publicly.
Right.
His guests, the people watching him.
This isn't just peer pressure like a teenager trying to look cool. This is political capital. If he refuses the girl after swearing an oath in front of the Roman commanders and Galilean nobles, he looks like a liar. He looks erratic.
He looks like a man who can't deliver. Exactly. He made a calculation. He weighed the life of a prophet against his own social standing.
And he decided that saving face was more important than saving a life.
It's the ultimate weakness, disguised as strength. He thought that keeping his word made him look like a strong king. But a truly strong king would have said, I promised you half my kingdom, not murder. Ask for something else.
That would have required moral courage. It would have required him to be willing to be embarrassed, and Herod Antipas could not handle embarrassment.
He was a slave to the opinion of the room.
So the order goes out. The executioner goes to the prison, just a few floors down or across the courtyard, and does the deed. The head is brought in. It's a scene of absolute horror, interrupting a birthday party.
And silence falls on the text regarding Herod's reaction until we get back to that paranoia at the very beginning.
John has been raised.
John has been raised. He killed the man to save his reputation with the guests, but he destroyed his own peace of mind forever.
He chose the temporary approval of the elite over the eternal truth that John spoke. And this brings me to the date, February 6th, because we have this perfect historical counterweight to Herod commemorated today.
You're talking about the Martyrs of Japan.
Yes, Saints Paul Miki and his companions.
It really is the perfect foil. So jump forward from 1st century Galilee to 16th century Japan, 1597.
Okay.
You have Paul Miki, a Japanese Jesuit, and 25 others, Franciscans, lay people, even children. They were arrested on the orders of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was the military ruler of Japan.
The shogun, essentially.
Yeah.
Another powerful ruler worried about his political control, much like Herod.
Exactly. Hideyoshi saw these Christians as a threat to the unity of Japan and his own authority. He wanted them silenced, so he ordered them to be marched hundreds of miles to Nagasaki and crucified.
And here's the connection. Herod was a man who compromised his conscience because he was afraid of what his guests would think. He was afraid of losing status. Paul Miki and his companions were stripped of all status. They were marched through the snow, mocked, and condemned to a shameful death.
But unlike Herod, they didn't break. Herod had everything: wealth, power, a kingdom. And he sold his soul to keep it. Paul Miki said nothing. He was bound on a cross, but he refused to sell his soul. There is this famous account of Paul Miki preaching from the cross. He didn't express anger or fear. He forgave his executioners and testified to the truth.
It's the inverse of the banquet. At the banquet, you have a king who is actually a slave to fear. On the hill in Nagasaki, you have prisoners who are the only truly free men.
That is the definition of a martyr. The word martyr just means witness. John the Baptist was a witness to the law of God, even when it offended the king.
Right.
Paul Miki was a witness to the gospel, even when it offended the shogun. They valued the truth more than they valued their lives. Herod valued his reputation more than the truth.
It really forces us to look at the cost of discipleship. We often think of martyrdom as this distant historical event. But the dynamic that killed John, the pressure of oaths and guests, is something we deal with all the time.
We do. We aren't client kings, and we hopefully aren't executing people at dinner parties.
Hopefully not.
But we all have our guests. We all have that circle of people whose approval we are desperate to keep.
Maybe it's the corporate culture at work where you have to nod along to something you know is unethical. Or, I don't know, maybe it's a social circle where you can't voice your actual beliefs for fear of being canceled or ostracized.
That is the Herod trap. You know what is right. You might even admire the truth, like Herod heard John gladly. You listen to the podcasts, you read the books. But when you are in that boardroom or at that dinner party and the pressure is on, do you speak or do you save face?
Herod shows us that you can be perplexed and interested in goodness, but if you don't have the courage to lose social capital, you will end up destroying what you claim to love.
He saved his face, but he lost his peace. That's the tragedy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave us with that image of the two different types of strength. You have Herod, surrounded by his armies and nobles, terrified of a teenage girl's request because of his ego. And you have John, alone in a cell, or Paul Miki on a cross, completely at peace.
It asks a hard question. Who are we really performing for? The guests at the banquet? Or for the truth?
And are we just subscribers to the truth? You know, people who hear it gladly, or are we actually willing to follow it when it gets awkward?
That is the difference between an admirer and a disciple.
A tough one to chew on today. Thanks for breaking this down with me.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.